So here we are with our first example and our very first step, remembering that step one is about determining whether a particular example of language constitutes an argument. Now, an argument is defined by having at least two claims. It can have many more, but there are at least two claims, one of which serves as evidence for another, one of which is intended to make me believe another claim. And remembering that for step one, you need to do two things. One, you need to make a judgment. You need to determine whether a particular example is or is not an argument. But then just as importantly, you need to justify your answer. You need to explain your answer. There may be cases where you may think an example is an argument, another person may not, and there may be reasonable disagreement on that point, but you need to be able to back up your answer. And that's going to be a theme through virtually all the steps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read silently this particular example and then start thinking about whether it constitutes an argument. Okay, so I'm trying to think about whether this piece of language is trying to convince me to do anything or to believe anything. It's certainly not trying to convince me that I ought to make these green beans. There are no claims that would lead me to believe that would be a good thing. In fact, this is really an example of instructions, an example of telling me how to do something without providing any evidence that I ought to or that it's a good idea. So I'm going to say this is not an argument, and I'm going to say that there are no claims that serve as evidence for other claims. This is a set of instructions, not an attempt to convince the reader of any particular claim. And that's enough. The justification doesn't have to be long. Often it can be done in one sentence. I've done it here in two. But that's certainly sufficient. And that's example one, doing step one.